Hi, everyone. It's your boy Zach, and 11-year-old me was dumb. So I just rewatched Star Trek 3 The Search for Spock. Probably the first rewatch I've seen since seeing it in the theaters in whatever, 1984 with my dad and the rest of my family. My dad was a big Star Trek fan. Um, and I remember just hating the movie. And you know how, like, when you form an opinion of something, especially when you're a kid, like, it's 30 years later and you're all like, oh, Star Trek 3 like just makes you, oh, maybe that's just me. But anyway, I remember as a kid not liking it as soon as I heard about it because I really loved Star Trek 2 The Wrath of Khan. I saw it in the theaters. I saw it on 16 millimeter projector at like at like church after school clubs, and probably saw it on a laser disc at one of my friends' house. But I thought it was a big cheat to kill someone. The big moment of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is, you know, Spock dying in that radiation chamber, and then you just bring him back in the next movie. It seems like such a cheat. And also, I was a kid, so all the stuff with like Pon farr, Spock, and Savik, that made me uncomfortable. And then it was just like kind of too serious and dark. I don't remember being bored. I do remember just being bothered. It's like, really going to kill him and then bring him right back? That seems cheap. Even as like an 11-year-old, I thought that was a cheap move. But when I started, doing Star Trek Discovery, and then I talked about I did some random episodes of Voyager and mainly Enterprise. And then I talked about watching the movies. And I said, I'm just going to skip around because I only like about half of them. But people kept saying, it's like, you got to watch all of them. Well, unfortunately, Amazon Prime doesn't have all of them. But Amazon Prime does have Star Trek 3. And I said, I'm not going to watch this. And then a bunch of people all said the exact same thing. They all said, because I said, I hated it as a kid. They all said the same thing. They say, I also hated it as a kid. And I watched it as an adult, and it's really, really good. And I have to tell you, it's really, really good. In fact, I kept saying, I was like, is this the best Star Trek movie? It's like, okay, no, calm down. It's not the best Star Trek movie, but it is a good one. The deal about Star Trek 2 is it was basically like a soft reboot of the franchise. Star Trek the Motion Picture was basically trying to be like 2001 A Space Odyssey, serious sci-fi. And then they just kind of cast about for the second one. And Nicholas Meyer, people pointed me in the direction of some interviews with him. Star Trek 2 was basically what I guessed from watching it. It was a greatest hits of things that everyone liked from like 5 different scripts that had nothing to do with each other. But Star Trek 3 was a continuation. So one of the things I like about Star Trek 3, which was directed by Leonard Nimoy, is that it is very, very focused and solid. There is no aspect of, 5 different subplots. It is very direct. Spock could be brought back. He technically is not gone. I mean, body-wise, he's been regenerated because of the Genesis device / Genesis torpedo, and I hope I remember to come back to that aspect because I liked it a lot. And so his body has been regenerated, and his mind is basically in virtual storage in McCoy's brain. So one of the things I just liked is this movie's short. I love short movies, 1 hour, 45 minutes. And honestly, once you take out beginning and end credits, I just noticed, I remember being a kid and watching, like Star Trek and Superman, and they would have these nice orchestral beginnings with, logos and titles. And I just realized as an adult, that's a cheap way to pad out like 5 minutes of your movie. Just have all these sweeping logos and some, orchestra that you already paid for to do the score of the entire movie. And that'll just like the movie barely even starts till like 6 minutes in. And then they even do like a little recap, almost like a TV show of, in the last episode. So it's straight, it's to the point. Spock can be regenerated. So we're off to the races. One of the things I really like about this is it has a consistent tone. It has this kind of somber feel, but it's it looks good. Like you get these models, you get the Klingon bird of prey, you get the Excelsior, which I was just reading was actually ready for Star Trek 2, but then they didn't put it in. They got it's not regular one. I don't know what there's a gigantic space station that's so big that the Enterprise and the Excelsior can just go in like the top of it. And it's just good. I'm trying to describe this without just saying it's just good. I'm just kind of continually shocked at how good it is. So they're dealing with I don't know why Carol Marcus is in there. It's probably some boring budget reason, but her son and Kirk's son David Marcus are in it, and they're following up on the Genesis device. One of the things I like the most about Deep Space Nine is Deep Space Nine is very interesting. It's basically taking any one episode story from TNG or TOS and then saying, okay, so there's this war on Bajor, and it's the Cardassians and it's the Bajorans. And okay, here's a plot, and we're done in 44 minutes and we're off to the next planet. So Deep Space Nine is like, what if we dealt with the repercussions of this war for the next 7 years? Because that's how real life is. You're in the military and you roll in, you do X, Y, or Z, and then you leave, and then the locals deal with it for the rest of their lives. So I always thought that was very interesting. I think it's very interesting to do a whole movie just dealing with stuff from the first movie. So obviously you have the Genesis device. I was very confused because I thought the Genesis device was only a terraforming device. I didn't realize that it could basically I was saying, where did the Genesis planet come from? Because there wasn't a planet near it. And people were saying it was in the nebula. There was lots of matter and energy. It basically drew in the matter and energy from the nebula, and it formed the Genesis planet. So I was like, all right, cool. So we get to find out what happens, more than 5 minutes after a Genesis planet is built. And what it does is it ages very rapidly, and then it collapses, because it was a little too good to be true that some device that could be hidden in a broom closet could form and generate a stable planet. Forming a planet, yes. Forming a stable planet, it might be a little bit too much. So it forms a planet, and then they shot Spock, his dead, irradiated body onto it, but it reforms matter, so it reformed him. And he's basically born again. Now, honestly, I would think that, just the way I understand it, you would think it would just kind of reduce him to a fixed version of his adult self. But what it does is it reforms him as a child or an infant, and then he rapidly grows over apparently a couple of days. David Marcus and Savick, who's been recast, and honestly, I don't know why they kept it as Savick. Like, Kirstie Alley was very, very memorable as Savick. She was just, she had a good storyline in Wrath of Khan, but oh my gosh, she's just sexy as hell. Everyone remembers Kirstie Alley as Savick. And then they recast her as this, I'm sure, very nice woman. But she doesn't match Savick. She doesn't match... Savick had kind of like a playful sense of humor. This character does not have that. Savick was also, she got them yams, as they say. This actress does not have them yams. And she's effectively a completely different character. And I guess there was supposed to be like a kind of a romance between David Marcus and Savick, I guess, in the novelizations. But I just assumed that, even as a kid, I assumed that David Marcus was gay. Like, he from, the actor and the way he portrayed the character, and the actor is himself gay. So I never, I think they just might have, I don't know. They wrote that out. So they're investigating. They're on not the Reliant. I forget the name of their ship. But they're investigating the planet. And they see that there's a life form down there, so they go down to investigate, and they find it's the young Spock. There's this really cool bit where there's these little weird kind of like sea-looking creatures at the base of it, and then David yeah, Marcus analyzes it. He goes, "Oh, these were microbes that were on like the exterior of the emptied out what do you call it, torpedo that they fired Spock down in, and they've evolved into these little weird, gross, like I don't know, like oysters or something like that." The cool thing is later on, oh my gosh, so Christopher Lloyd is this Klingon commander called Krug, and he's freaking fantastic. Um, so at one point later on in the story, Krug beams down, and his crew, they're actually kind of grossed out and scared because these little oyster things have grown into these like snake creatures. And Krug, who's smaller than the other Klingons, but he's more badass. That's how he gets to be captain. He's smart. He goes up, he grabs one of them. It wraps itself around its arm like a boa constrictor. It wraps itself around his neck and has all these spikes. And then he just squeezes it and kills it. And then he takes out his communicator and he calls up to his ship and he says, "Nothing to report here." It's just such an awesome moment. But anyway, so you got this character Krug who's trying to find the Genesis device. I can't tell if it's for the glory of the Empire or maybe he just wants it to sell it. There's a cool scene where apparently his lover or his wife or something, she was undercover on a merchant vessel that was tracking it. And she finds out about it, and then Krug basically says, "This is top secret. You got to die. You know about it." And she understands. She's like, "Yeah, I understand." So it's Krug trying to get the Genesis device, and here's what I like. So one of the weird things about getting older is there can be huge things in society that end, and then people just kind of not forget about them, but they don't think about them. This was released in 1984 in the height of the Cold War. The Cold War was basically Russia and the United States have tons of nukes, thousands of nukes. And there was this big fear. Like when I was a kid, there would be classes on what to do if we're attacked by the Russians. So the Klingons are essentially the Russians, and they're trying to get a super nuke, the Genesis device. Although they refer to it as the Genesis torpedo. They see this purely for its destructive abilities. You can fire this at a planet. It will reform, remake everyone on it, probably, devolve them or evolve them, and then the planet will collapse in a couple days. Krug and the Klingons do not see the Genesis device as a failure. They see it as a fantastic weapon, possibly the best weapon that exists in the Star Trek universe at that time. So he's in it to win it. He wants it. And I just love the idea that they call this thing a weapon, a torpedo, not a device. The other thing is that when the Enterprise is coming up, they refer to Enterprise as a battleship. They call it a battleship cruiser. So I really like that. That's some really good writing to put your head into, the POV of, the enemy characters and see how they look at it. So this was basically written as kind of like an arms race type of thing that would have meant a lot if you were living in 1984 and, the Cold War and all of that stuff. So what happens is McCoy is acting up because he's got Spock's mind. They realize that Spock's body, that if they could, connect it, then Spock could be brought back. So they steal the Enterprise, which is about to be mothballed, and they go over to the Genesis planet. And then there's a lot of plot stuff twisted around with, Krug's there, and David Marcus and Savick are there, and Spock is there. And then it's, like I said, it's just good. This is done very, very straightforward. And it's almost a second soft reboot. Motion picture was, kind of boring and slow and trippy in 2001. Wrath of Khan was like, we're going for normies, we're going for big box office, laughs, excitement, swashbuckling. This is almost a second course correct, a second soft reboot. It's like, we want to do a more serious movie. Spock, or Nimoy, I just called Nimoy Spock, but, he wrote a book called I Am Not Spock. And then later he wrote a book that said I Am Spock. But he was very much kind of over being Spock. And he didn't want to be in it. He asked to be written out of the second one. And I think he got lured back by, we're going to let you direct. This was his I believe, first a directing gig, and he does really, really good. And things just look better. Like Star Trek 2 is good, but there was some like really wonky. There was a couple of bad effects in here. Most of the effects were good. Like at one point, when David Marcus is killed, and Kirk goes down to the planet, the first Vulcan he sees, he fires his phaser, and the phaser effects look a lot better. And then it like hits the Klingon and like throws him back like 20 feet. That looks cool, even like 25 years later. So the movie is very, very good. It's very solid. It's very dramatic. I would call this more of a dramatic piece than sci-fi, although it is science fiction with, the aspects of, dealing. I really, like I said, I really like doing a whole movie that just deals with stuff left over from the last movie. I really enjoyed it. I looked it up to see if it did good. I remember doing good, and like I guess it was a big hit of the summer of '84. So go check it out if you are like me and like the other people who commented and saying, "Boy, I hated this movie when I was a kid, but it's really good as an adult." It absolutely is. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll have. They don't have Star Trek 4. They do have Star Trek 5 on Amazon Prime. So I'm gonna skip to 5, and I'll do that one next. Thanks for watching. Bye.